assume 7 o'clock, but though they can always watch it on the YouTube. So hello everyone, my name is Elizabeth Kale, and today I'm going to present on the history of Norwegian merchant mariners. And this topic is especially special to me. As Melody said, my husband is a merchant mariner. He is not Norwegian, he's American, but I have Norwegian roots, so that side of it is interesting to me. So I said, why not combine the both and research this topic and share it with you all. So next slide. So today's topics are going to be defining merchant mariners, Norway's geography, ancient history of seafaring, particularly the Vikings, and fishing and trade, merchant mariners in World War II, the maritime industry today, and the future of maritime in Norway. So when we talk about merchant mariners, we kind of want to focus on the ships that they're on. So a merchant ship, merchant vessel, trading vessel, or a merchantman is a watercraft that transports cargo or carries passengers for hire. And this includes cargo ships, ferries, fishing vessels, passenger ships, and tankers. And this contrasts to pleasure craft and military vessels. That's like military purposes. And the pictures that you see there are just some examples of the different ships that a merchant mariner would be on. So when we're looking at a map of Norway, we can see that it encompasses a lot of water. So Norway has one of the longest coastlines in the world after Canada, and the coastline is about 63,000 miles of fjords, islands, and inlets. So it's no wonder that the small population of Norway has been involved in maritime for so long. And here is a quote from an Old Norse saga. Over the foaming salt sea spray, the Norse sea horses took their way, racing across the ocean plain, southwards to Denmark's green domain. Next slide. So now we're going to talk about the Vikings and why did they go and explore so far away from their homeland, other than raiding and pillaging. One of the first reasons was coincidence. So the Vikings' navigation sometimes failed them. Sometimes they wound up at the bottom of the sea, and sometimes they wound up in Iceland or Greenland. So they ventured pretty far. And another reason was recognition and respect. So it took a lot of courage for them to sail out and look for new land. So sometimes this was seen as prestigious. And another reason could have been lack of inheritance. So maybe they weren't getting the family farm, or they weren't going to become a merchant. So maybe the next best thing was to go sail out and explore new lands. And another explanation that researchers have found was also banishment. Maybe they weren't so popular in their town. Maybe they were doing something bad that nobody liked, so they kicked them out of there and said, go and enjoy your freedom far away. And here's a quote from an archaeologist. The Vikings sometimes spent weeks waiting for optimal weather conditions before they set out to sea, so that the journey would be as short and as safe as possible. They knew from experience what time of the season was best for each of the various routes. And I'm just gonna put in something that I wasn't planning to say, but it's, so they still kind of do that today. Even the last time that Chris was on his ship, he was coming back from Europe, and there was a huge storm in the middle of the ocean, and they're like, we're just gonna wait this out in the English canal and wait until the storm has passed. So they're still trying to avoid storms and do what's best for the safety of everybody. So now we're going to talk about navigation. So Vikings did not have the use of current technologies that we have today, such as compasses, radio communication, and satellites. So they were mainly relying on nature. For example, the sun, moon, stars, and if it was cloudy or foggy, maybe land masses. And another example of nature that they would rely on was different types of animals. So maybe if they were getting close to the Faroe Islands, they'd be like, okay, we know that there's a certain type of bird around here. We know we're close to this area. Or they could try to keep track of migration patterns of whales or different fish to keep track of where they were at. And then they'd also use chants and rhymes as travelogues. And then they'd also use their different senses, like scent, like touch, taste, and smell to see where they were going. And here's just a map of all the different places that the Vikings explored. So as we can see, they went a lot of different places. And now moving on to fishing and trade in the Stone Age. So fishing in Norway can be traced back as far as the Stone Age. So we can see this from rock art, and here's an example of the rock art. And so Norway, fishing, and maritime have all been linked for a really long time. Next slide. And what fish, may you ask? Cod and herring are the two main fish. And this is herring, picture a herring right here, and cod up there. And we can tell it's been a big part of their lives because it goes all the way back to those sagas, the medieval period writing, and it mentions cod and herring. And then we can also see king cods, which are large wooden carved fish in churches, hanging up in the churches. And Leif Erikson sailed to America in 1001, and his ship was filled with nutritious stockfish, which is wind-dried cod, to sustain his expedition as well. And so now we're moving to the 1200s, 1300s in Norway, and especially in Bergen, which is on the western side of Norway. And there's a picture of it right there. And for a while, Bergen was kind of not really occupied, but a portion of Bergen called Bregen was kind of taken over by the Hanseatic League, and the Hanseatic League was based in Germany. So the Hanseatic League was a medieval commercial and defensive network of merchant guilds and market towns in Central and Northern Europe. And while Bergen is linked with German traders, Bergen's status as an import port was in place for at least 150 years prior to them coming there. And in 1350, that's when the Hanseatic League established an office in Bergen. And one of the biggest and main things that they were trading there was fish. So cod was a good choice after the herring because they could dry it and it could last for years and years. And that picture over there is an example of them drying the cod up in northern Norway. And yeah, it would be just outside, and that was the best technique for drying it. So yeah, the Norwegian fishermen would go out, fish, and then bring their stock back to Bergen and trade to the Hanseatic League and make their living. And so where did all these fish go after they traded them? They went all throughout Europe, and these fish have been called Norway's biggest ambassadors. dried cod was especially prized as far away as Italy, Portugal, and Spain, where they formed a key ingredient in the tasty, spicy fish stews. For example, bacalhau, which you can see a picture there. In return, the trade in cod and herring enabled Norwegians to buy wine, spices, flour, jewelry, and other goods like that. And the fishing trade still continues on today with salmon and cod and all of those other seafood. But the fish trade hasn't always come easy. Sometimes with the weather patterns and currents and food sources, it could vary over time. And overfishing also became a problem in the late 1900s. And then climate change now also poses a threat to the fishing. So Norway has been leading the way in implementing regulations, such as a Coast Guard and different acts and unions, in order to keep the ecosystem thriving and the trade continuing on. So now we're going to move to World War II and the merchant mariners in World War II, particularly Norway ship. And Norway tried to stay neutral in World War II, but soon they were occupied by the Nazis. But they still wanted to find a way to support their allies. So the Norwegian government in exile formed the Norwegian Shipping and Trade Commission to manage the Norwegian fleet, and that was what they called Norway ship. And this is the flag of Norway ship. So now I have a little video from a historian guy to kind of break things up, and I'm not going to play the whole video, I'm just going to play a couple of clips from it, because I think he explains it really well.
Germany invaded Norway in April 1940 and defeated the Nordic nation in a 62-day campaign. But many Norwegians continued to serve the Allied war effort, serving from Allied countries like the United Kingdom and Canada as part of the Free Norwegian Forces, or at home as part of the Norwegian resistance. But it was a group of Norwegian civilians who had arguably the largest impact on the war. In fact, some have argued that without them, the Allies would have lost the war. The Norwegian government in exile formed the Norwegian Shipping and Trade Commission, called Nortraship, to manage the Norwegian merchant fleet, and their little-remembered contribution was a vital part of the Allied war effort. It is history that deserves to be remembered. On the night of April 9th and 10th, 1940, German forces attacked Norway. The Norwegians were largely caught off guard, although they did sink the German flagship Blücher, and this delayed the Germans long enough for the royal family, government, and treasury to escape from Oslo. The Norwegian government in exile was headquartered in London, and Norwegian forces served admirably throughout the war. But Norway's greatest contribution to the war effort wasn't in strength of arms, but in tonnage of ships. When Germany invaded, hundreds of Norwegian-owned ships were scattered across the world. In the interwar years, Norway's merchants had purchased dozens of new ships, turning their fleet into the fourth largest in the world, and one considerably newer than anyone else's. As much as 65% of the Norwegian ships were less than 10 years old, only 22% of US ships, and just 7% of the UK merchant ships were that new. Norway held almost a fifth of the world's total tanker capacity. In all, the Norwegian fleet had some 4.8 million gross registered tons at its disposal. The relationship between Norway and Britain didn't start with the invasion. In World War I, Norway had been called the neutral ally, thanks to its technical neutrality but British favoring policies during the war. Norway declared neutrality in September of 1939, but their position was always tenuous. The first Norwegian ship to sink was the MS Ronda, which hit a mine on September 13th, 1939. They had trade relationships with both Germany and the United Kingdom, but Norway relied much more on trade from the UK, which provided grain, oil, coal, and controlled dozens of international ports. Leadership in London knew that war would require much greater shipping capacity. With war with Germany looming, they hoped to gain control of, or at least cooperation with, the Norwegian fleet. Before they even entered the war, Norway and the United Kingdom had come to terms on the Scheme Agreement, which promised a percentage of the Norwegian fleet to sail under a British charter, including about 2/3 of the tanker tonnage. In exchange, the Norwegians were promised important commodities necessary to keep the country functioning. In order to maintain Norwegian neutrality, the agreement was officially negotiated by the Norwegian Shipowners Association. During the 7 months after the war began and the invasion of Norway, more than 50 Norwegian ships and some 400 crew were lost to German hunting. Denmark and the Netherlands both refused to sign similar agreements. Norway's neutrality was doomed from the start. Norway was especially valuable because it controlled a major supply of iron, especially from northern Sweden, that the Third Reich needed. On the same day it invaded Norway, the Nazis invaded Denmark, and a month later Belgium, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, and France. Forces in Norway fought on until the 10th of June, longer than any other invaded country in the early part of the war. But by then, the UK was busy dealing with the collapse of Allied defenses in France. The founding of Nortraship itself occurred in a flurry of activity after the invasion. 12 days after the invasion, royal mandate had confirmed government requisition of the entire merchant fleet, otherwise privately owned by Norwegian shipowners, many of whom were still stranded in Norway. On the 23rd, Norwegian government officials were dispatched to London with control of the merchant fleet to be given to Eivind Lorentzen, a shipowner in charge of the shipping directorate. By the time they reached London, they found that much of the preparatory work had already been completed by Norway's minister there and Ingolf Ising Olsen of the Shipowners Association. In fact, the offices at 144 Leadenhall Street opened 4 hours before Lorentzen's arrival. Later, they would open other offices outside the city and in New York. Shortly after Norway fell, the Germans took over radio in Oslo and broadcast to the Norwegian merchant fleet that they were to make for neutral ports or to return home to Norway, but not to go to any British ports. The BBC immediately radioed out a counter order inviting the Norwegian vessels to come to Allied ports for safety, where they would be welcomed and receive compensation for their services. The creation of Nortraship was highly contested. The British still wanted to simply take control of the fleet, but the Free Norway government wanted to maintain its control and its independence. Without the merchant fleet, Free Norway had no means of supporting itself or its armed forces. One of the sticking points was who should insure the fleet, but after a few days and an incredibly short negotiation, the British were able to telegram captains that your ship is held covered by the British government against war and marine risks on the values and conditions under which she is at present insured. It was a remarkable achievement, apparently in less than an hour, mostly through Lloyd's, without knowing where the ships were or what they carried. Admirably, not a single Norwegian ship obeyed the Nazi broadcast from Oslo. The fleet comprised around 1,000 ships, from ocean liners and tankers to Norway's whaling fleet. It was one of the largest merchant fleets in the world and called itself the world's largest shipping company. Their position was fairly unique. Denmark, which had surrendered, had its ships essentially commandeered. In 1941, Norwegian shipowners formed an association to defend their interests. Partially, they feared that the government intended to nationalize shipping after the war, which the Norwegian government denied. There was also the issue of payment. Before the invasion, Norwegian crews received a 300% hazard pay. Afraid the pay difference would affect the morale of other Allied crews, Britain demanded that UK merchants and Norwegian ones be compensated equally once they joined the war. Eventually, Norwegian crews were promised only slightly higher rates. Joining the war, however, was dangerous. In the summer after the invasion, losses skyrocketed. In the next 9 months, Norway lost 96 ships to enemy action and began to have problems crewing their ships. Norway negotiated for higher wages to offset the difficulties, first in 1941 and then again in 1942. The British continued to push for chartering all Norwegian vessels, but ultimately only took control of about 75%. These ships were vital. They helped to pull enormous amounts of lend-lease equipment across the ocean, to England and France, and then later to the Soviets, as well as tons of oil, gas, and food. It was also highly profitable for Norway. Shipping always comes at a premium in war, and Nortraship earned around 4.5 billion Norwegian kroner during the war, most of which was from shipwreck compensation, the rest directly from trade. Most of that money went to the ship owners for losses, but around 800 million kroner came back to the government, more than the entirety of their rescued treasury. In 1964, the government estimated the financial contribution from Nortraship to Norwegian society to amount to 1.2 billion kroner. When the decision was made to cut the Norwegian sailors' hazard pay, the UK continued to pay the same amount to Norway, with the difference being paid in a separate account, now called the Secret Fund. There seems to have been an understanding that this money would be paid to the sailors after the war. However, this was not to be. After the war, the Norwegian government decided that 43 million kroner fund should be dispersed to the widows and children of seafarers that had died, as well as those disabled during the service. Sailors, however, were already pressing in court for their own claims to the money. The sailors' case was thrown out by the Norwegian Supreme Court in 1954. That wasn't the only example of poor treatment for Norwegian sailors. Some of the sailors had been gone so long that they were removed from voter rolls, while others were forced to do compulsory military service, their service aboard the merchant fleet deemed insufficient. Many of the sailors suffered PTSD, called War Sailor Syndrome, but were given much smaller pensions than soldiers who'd been held in Norway during the war. Some politicians even argued they deserved no pension at all. Up to the 1960s, war sailors and their families had to prove their problems were a direct result of the war. It wasn't until 1968 that the burden was reversed, that the government had to prove that the problems were not caused by the war. It wasn't until 2013 that the Norwegian Minister of Defense issued an apology.
So as you can see, the Norwegian merchant mariners gave great sacrifice, and it's often forgotten or overshadowed, but we can still remember them today, and there's also memorials that still stand today to remember them. For example, there's one in Canada, in Nova Scotia, and it's outside the Maritime Museum of the Atlantic, and there's also one in Stavern, Norway. There's, in 2022, the Norwegian movie War Sailor described the traumatic events of the sailors, and I'm going to play the trailer for it, and you can kind of get a more dramatized effect of what these sailors went through. Glad I didn't tear up. I was trying not to cry. So yeah, that little movie series, I think it's a 3-part. It is in Norwegian, but you can have the subtitles. And I think when I watched it, it was dubbed in English. So that's on Netflix, and I highly recommend it. So now we'll move on to the maritime industry today in Norway, and we'll just talk about a couple of different facts. So Norway is one of the largest maritime offshore nations and has been a major player in shipping and shipbuilding for more than 150 years. And it's the world's 4th largest merchant fleet by value, and by comparison, the United States is 5th. And there are 1,634 Norwegian-controlled ocean-going ships as of 2023. And one of their emission goals, so Norwegian Shipowners Association and backed by the government, are spearheading development of zero-emission shipping. And now we'll talk about the future of maritime in Norway. So in regards to technology, Norway is leading, transferring their extensive knowledge from offshore oil and gas to various maritime sectors. So we all know that the oil industry is super big in Norway, so they're just trying to get that knowledge to their shipping as well. In aquaculture and ocean farming, so addressing the critical sustainability issues like sea lice, fish escapes and algae blooms, and nitrogen pollution, so they're also leading the way in that. And as we've learned, the maritime industry isn't just about ships, it's also about fishing, and especially in Norway, so you know, they want to keep their oceans and waterways clean and healthy. And zero emission goals, so short sea ship owners have adopted new propulsion systems, mainly battery or electric technology, but also hydrogen. So most of the 200 plus ferries will soon be emission free, and concepts for autonomous shipping are also underway. And the deep sea propulsion is also under testing, and it includes biogas, hydrogen, and most notably ammonia. So yeah, these technologies, it's going to take a little bit longer for deep sea sailing, but the ferry boats are already existing today, so it's pretty cool. And so the ferry boats that I was talking about are right here. And so yeah, those are the electric ferries. And 7 out of 10 Norwegian Ship Owners Association members believe they will cut greenhouse gas emissions by 50% per unit by 2030. And nearly 8 out of 10 believe they will be climate neutral by 2050. And that is the end of my presentation. So thank you all for coming, and if you all have any questions or comments, please let me know. And as I said, my husband Chris is here, and if you have any questions about the American shipping industry today, he will definitely be able to answer that as well. So. Corey?
Did I understand that today Norway has the 4th largest shipping fleet?
Yeah, and I found that kind of surprising, but you know, just with the industry of the fishing and oil and all those things, and you know, it's counting the ferry boats, it's probably counting smaller vessels as well, not just like the big deep sea vessels. So. Yes?
How are the Norwegian officers on the ship trained? Is there a maritime academy? Because if you're on a cruise ship, almost anywhere in the world, the odds are the officers are going to be Norwegian. And I'm just wondering, how do they produce the officers?
I can't answer directly for that, but I do know that there's a training vessel that's come to Norfolk, and it's called the Statsrad Lemko. And actually, my husband and I have been to it, and hopefully they'll come back again. But it comes from an academy that's kind of like Maritime Naval Academy in Norway.
Okay.
And so a lot of those young cadets will sail across the ocean, and it's kind of like their journey to train and everything like that. You know, so I will say that my husband went to the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy in Long Island, New York, so I guess it's probably kind of a similar sort of thing.
Thank you.
Yes.
Are women merchant marines?
Yes. Yeah.
And how long is that, when did that happen?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know when that started happening, but yeah, Chris can answer. There's plenty of.
Yeah, typically we have, on average, I would say 1 or 2 females on board, a crew size of 20 to 24. So they're definitely the minority, but they're definitely out there.
I would assume the same for Norwegian because they're more progressive than we are.
Yes, sir.
Are you able to travel with your husband on some trips?
I have not yet, but there's a special ID card that you have to get that enables you to go onto the ships and everything. So I just got that not too long ago. I probably won't go on a whole 3-month-long trip with him, sorry to say. It's not quite a cruise ship, but maybe a little trip down to, a lot of times he'll go down to Charleston and Houston, so maybe from Norfolk to Charleston would be a cool time to experience it, so that'll probably be in the works soon.
Yeah, she was referring to what's called a TWIC card, Transportation Workers Identification Card. That's kind of like the main port badge that all the ports in the United States uses. So yeah, Elizabeth has a TWIC card, and with that she was able to access to the port, access to the ship, and I gave her a full tour when the ship was here in Norfolk. And then as for family members riding the vessel, that is a thing for officers. We can bring on our spouses or family members. I know not too long ago the chief mate brought his father along. We went from Norfolk to Charleston to Houston, and his dad was a part of that, so that was pretty neat. So yeah, maybe one day Elizabeth will ride for maybe a week, up to a week or so.
Thank you.
Tell us about your ship in Norwegian.
So typically I'm on Maersk container ships. They're 1,000 feet long, 65,000 horsepower. I'm an engineer, second engineer right now. So I work down below all day. There's 3 departments on the ship. There's the deck department. Those guys work out on deck. That also includes the mates on the bridge that navigate the vessel and communicate with other vessels. And then the engine department, engineering department, we're responsible for all the equipment and machinery. And then you have the stewards department, and they cook the food, do all the linens, the laundry, wash the dishes, and general housekeeping, keep the house clean. But yeah, we carry up to roughly about 5,000 containers, and we're on the Northern European route. We don't necessarily know what's in the containers. It could be anything, military stuff, clothing, food, flowers, cars, blood, medical stuff. Yeah, you name it. Whatever people ship in containers is what goes on the ship.
Do you have training, seeing what's going on in the Red Sea and the Middle East and whatever, do you have training to protect your ship against pirates and other ne'er-do-wells?
Yeah, we go through anti-piracy training, general security training. I'll be honest, I haven't received any training regarding getting missiles shot at the ship. We say the safest place is actually the engine control room. That's probably like the middle of the ship with the most steel around you, so that's probably the safest place. But yeah, I mean, when you go through the Suez Canal in that area of the world, typically, at least the U.S. flag companies, they contract a security team, and typically that's 4 retired Navy SEALs, and they're trained for, you name it, and they stand a 24-hour roving watch, and they have guns. So when you're in contested waters, they bring on contractors to help protect the ship.
How long is your deployment?
I typically do 3 months on, but it's nice, the ship that I get on, and again, I'm not assigned to one individual ship. It's just a ship that I choose to go to, and I hope to get on that ship just because I know the guys on there and we all work well together. But yeah, I ship out of Norfolk, and we go over to Europe, come back, Norfolk, Charleston, Houston, back to Norfolk. So it's nice being on the ship to where I can go home and see Elizabeth fairly often, unlike being out for 3 months and never seeing home. So it's nice to be able to go back to Norfolk so often. Yeah, when I was a cadet, so like Elizabeth said, I went to the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy. It's the only federal maritime academy. There's some other state academies too, but during my time there, I spent 300 days out at sea as a cadet position down in the engine room, and there I went all over the world on various vessels. So I did see a little bit, all around the world, but primarily nowadays I'm typically on the Northern European route. Yes?
Other than Norfolk, because of Elizabeth, what's your favorite port?
I would say Bremer.
But out of all of them,
Out of all the ones I've been to, either Guam or Saipan, because I love the water. You can snorkel anywhere you want, and just tropical environment's really nice. But nowadays, other than Norfolk, I would say Bremerhaven, Germany, and that's because the downtown area is so close to the terminal. It's like you could walk downtown if you wanted to, but it's about a 10-minute taxi ride. Some of these container terminals, like Antwerp, for example, it's an hour taxi ride just to get into town. So Bremerhaven's really convenient. Yes?
Have you been to any ports in Norway?
I have not.
Yet.
Not yet. Yes, sir.
So if you continue this, where's your career path going to take you? Are you stuck in an engineering track, or can you get command from where you are?
So the top level in the engine department is known as the chief engineer, and that's almost equivalent to the captain. Again, the captain's on this side, the chief engineer's on this side. The captain is one notch above just because his position is overall responsible for the whole vessel. But as far as pay is concerned, chief engineer makes just as much as the captain, and the chief engineer is responsible for all equipment on board.
Can you jump to that track from where you were, or are you really in this one engineering track?
Yes, so I will never sail as captain. I will never sail as mate. That's a different license, different department. So yeah, when you graduate from the academy and pass the exam, it's a big Coast Guard licensing exam. So you start out as third engineer, and then second engineer, first engineer, chief engineer. Yeah, I have enough days right now to sit and take my first license. So hopefully by the end of the year, I'll have that under my belt.
What kind of license do you have?
Yeah, so it's just so there's different propulsion types. Like my license right now, it's for steam, diesel electric, and gas turbine propulsion. So you take an electrical exam, you take a refrigeration exam, you take a general's exam, a motor's exam, just basically different modules to test you on different systems and different components in the engine room.
When you're in port, what's the ratio of time spent at sea versus loading and unloading a ship?
So on the size of ship that I'm on, which is 5,000 containers max, we're generally in port no longer than 24 hours. It's a pretty quick turnaround. Yeah, Norfolk is generally 12 hours when we come back from Europe, and it's about 24 when we're about to head over to Europe.
Are those containers full both ways?
No. Yeah, I don't know exactly how many are empty and how many are full, because as engineers, we don't deal with the cargo planning or any of that. But yeah, we carry a lot of empties. And then we also, some people don't know, but a lot of the boxes are refrigerated. So it's just a standard box, standard container, but it's fully insulated, and it has its own refrigeration unit on the back of it. And it's 440 volts, it plugs right into the ship. So yeah, she reminded me when I was a cadet on the ship that was over in Guam and Saipan and Japan and Korea. We loaded a container that had, I think, 800 kegs of beer. And it was a refrigerated container, but it came on, and we have an electrician on board that goes around and checks all the set points. It's just like a thermostat in your house. You want to make sure that that particular box is in range. Well, it came on way out of range. It was way too cold. So all 800 kegs of beer froze. But Saipan, they still took it. They still wanted it. Yes, Corey.
Has the dramatic backlog in shipping returned finally down to normal around the world in the U.S.?
Yeah, I know during COVID, especially in the Pacific, container rates were really expensive. Ships were waiting weeks to get into California. Yeah, it's not like that right now. I never experienced that. That was mainly on the West Coast in the Pacific. But yeah, I would say globally we're back to about where we were prior to COVID. There's no back jams, backlogs like there were.
Can you talk a little bit about the automation that are in these ports and how they load and unload ships? And where, like, are most of the ports sort of state of the art, or do you go in someplace and, guys are pulling them off with ropes and donkeys?
That's the case in Africa. There's still ports like that. But yeah, all the ports that we go to on my ship, they're pretty nice and pretty, they're well run. Matter of fact, speaking on the automation that you brought up, the port of Rotterdam that we go to, it's very automated. So you see the big gantry cranes. When you look out, you see a port, you see those humongous cranes that come down over the ships. Those are all manned, but all the support down on the ground to move the boxes throughout the yard, to get them ready to be loaded onto the ship. The Port of Rotterdam has automated container trolleys. So you can see it's all black marks, perfectly tracked. There's, all the wear marks are perfectly in line. There's nobody driving these things, and they're very smart. But yeah, that's the only port that we go to that's automated like that.
Is Port Norfolk a little bit more automated than the regular port?
No. Yeah, Port Norfolk, I think they say to operate one of those gantry cranes, it takes about 20 longshoremen, and that includes the longshoremen that are on the ship. There's these turnbuckles on all four corners of the containers that they have to unclick so that the container can pop right up. You got the longshoremen unclicking the twist locks. You have somebody on the ground that's making sure the right container is loaded at the right position. You got the crane operator. You have truck drivers moving the containers. So they say 20 people per crane. And some of the big ships have 7 cranes going at one time. We typically have no more than 5 on our ship. Yes.
Does the change of seasons limit your crossing on the North Atlantic? Are there times of year you just avoid it?
So wintertime in the North Atlantic does get rough, and because of that, we take a more southerly route. As a matter of fact, December, we hung out around the Azores waiting for storms to clear before we enter the English Channel. But yeah, summertime, we can cross the Atlantic in 7 days. That's going north, assuming smooth seas. But yeah, the wintertime, like Elizabeth mentioned earlier, sometimes we have to camp out and wait for storms to pass. And we can't go as fast when it's rough. That's just nature of the beast. It'll beat the ship up, and we got to slow down. Over here.
Would you comment on how many containers you lose?
I've never been on a ship that's lost one. It does happen, but as long as your stability is right and all the containers are lashed down properly, you shouldn't lose any. Ellie?
When you say containers, you're talking about a railroad car?
Yeah,
And you have 5,000 containers on your ship?
So a 20-foot equivalent unit, that is one container when they size container vessels. So yeah, these boxes, there's a few different standardized sizes. They either come 20 feet long, 40 feet long, or 45 feet long. And a standard is 8 by 8, 8 feet tall, 8 feet across. They're always going to be 8 feet across. That's how the ships are made, to stack them next to each other. But a tall container is 9 feet tall. So yeah, when I say 5,000 containers, that's 5,000 20 feet long and 8 feet wide, 8 feet tall.
How much are you able to keep in touch with Elizabeth?
Every day. We have Wi-Fi on the ship. Yeah, it's pretty good for the most part, so it's
Pretty
nice.
lucky that there's
Yeah.
Wi-Fi and we don't have to write a letter.
You do WhatsApp? You do WhatsApp?
Facebook Messenger, yeah.
Yeah, we typically use Facebook Messenger, we can FaceTime, so it's nice.
So, I moved to France years ago, so we went to see Container. First time I'd ever seen them, and they pulled up in our little cul-de-sac.
Yeah.
It was a small house, but we had a piano and 3 bedrooms and finished basement, and everything went. So what can, I think we had 2 containers.
Okay.
Does that sound right? Or how big might those have been? When you're saying they're like 3 main sizes, right?
If they were 20 foot, that's probably more suitable for sitting in your driveway. So you might have had 2 20-foot boxes.
I think they were in the driveway, they were in the street.
Oh, then maybe they were 40 footers.
Depends on how much.
Yeah. But to put into perspective, the ship that I'm on is very small compared to the biggest container ships in the world. So, yeah, like the Ever Given that got stuck in the Suez Canal, I think that was almost 24,000 containers.
Whoa.
Yeah, and when you're behind one in port, they're more than twice the width of our ship and so much taller. They're humongous.
So do you ever go into the Havre?
I'm sorry?
The Havre, the port?
I've never been there.
Because
No.
that's the way that our stuff went to ports.
Okay.
in France.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I was supposed to get on a ship called the Maersk Ohio when I was a cadet at school, and that was one of its protocols at the time. And I've since been on the Maersk Ohio, but we no longer go over there.
I've seen that there's a way to hitch a ride on ships that go across the Atlantic. And do you ever have passengers that book those extra rooms, or how does that work?
No, we've never had one. To be honest, we don't really have space for them. I mean, we have spare rooms, but they're generally for like a pilot. When we take on a North Sea pilot that spends a week on the ship, they go there. Or if we have contractors riding the vessel, they need somewhere to go. Yeah, we've never had a rider like that, but I know that's a thing on foreign flag ships. As a matter of fact, when I was in Bremerhaven, Germany, waiting to catch the shuttle back to the ship, there was a guy joining a Mediterranean shipping company ship that was riding with the United States.
But if you want to get a Twig card, maybe we can hook it.
Did I see a hand over here? No? Corey?
Are there special ships to haul hazardous materials and special facilities in ports?
So the closest thing to that would be a chemical tanker, and those haul certain chemicals, fluids, and they're generally small tankers. We can carry dangerous goods way up forward, way up by the bow. Cargo holds 1 and 2 are designated dangerous goods cargo holds. Yeah, there's certain things like the bilge pump up there, a dedicated bilge pump in case something dangerous leaks down the cargo hold. Yeah, if it's considered a dangerous good, it'll just go up there in a container. But yeah, we'll carry it.
Well, obviously, we're fascinated by most questions we've ever.
Yeah, it's a cool industry.
I'm learning a little bit too with these questions.
Yeah, I would say that the main types of ships. So you got the container ship. That's probably the workhorse of the merchant marine, carries the most stuff. Then you have tanker ships. You have what's called ro-ros. That's your car carrier. It's basically a floating parking garage. I was on one. It was 13 decks high. It just carries anything that has wheels and can roll on. That's equipment, heavy equipment, excavators, bulldozers, trailers, tanks, helicopters, you name it. If it can drive on the ship, that's a ro-ro, car carrier. You have bulkers, which carries anything, rock, gravel, wheat, pallets, anything in pallets that can lower down the hold, coal. Yeah, I was on a bulker up on the Great Lakes carrying iron ore, salt, gravel, just anything in bulk. It's basically a dump truck. Tankers, container ships, ro-ros, bulkers. Yeah, that's the bulk of the type of ships. And then you have the Military Sealift Command. Those are civilian merchant mariners, and those gray-hulled vessels, they might look like military ships to the average person, but those are actually just supply ships. So those will carry mail, ammo, cargo, parts, fuel, whatever that the Navy ships need, the Military Sealift Command will supply them, and those are civilian merchant mariners. Yes?
Are there any particular kind of packaging that would be used for grain? Because are you going to be wanting to use a ship that's got grain in it and then had owned it previously, or how do you separate that out so that the
Yeah, they'll wash down the cargo hold. So typically on those ships, there's a massive conveyor belt that's located, low down on the ship, close to the keel. And these cargo holds are like hoppers, and they have a gate that'll open up and drop the goods down to the conveyor belt. And then the conveyor belt has a series of, back and forths that bring it up. And then out on deck, they have another conveyor belt that can swing out next to the ship and discharge that way. Yeah, and then once you're done, they just you'll spray water in the cargo hold, wash it all down.
So are they all U.S. citizens on your boats?
Yes. Yep, everyone has a U.S. passport.
Can you talk about a little bit about why we have a merchant marine fleet as opposed to just general contracting, the third parties all the time?
Yeah, sure.
Cost differential, if there is one.
So yeah, American shipping is very expensive compared to foreign flag shipping. But a big thing is too, so say we have a major conflict, our military vessels are not designed to transport a lot of cargo, a lot of equipment, a lot of goods. So it's important for security and the economy to have a thriving merchant marine. So, say there's a conflict around the world, you got to crew up these merchant ships and get the cargo to the other side of the world. But yeah, American shipping, it is expensive. But typically what these companies will do is when they build a brand new ship, they'll give it to the foreign fleet. It's cheaper. They're not taking care of everything as good as we do. So they'll basically have a brand new ship, run it in their foreign flag, run it to the ground for 5 years for as cheap as possible, and then give it to us, and we'll spend the next 5 to 10 years bringing it back to life, making it in good shape again. And then right when it's in good shape, they'll give it back to the foreign flag, run it into the ground, and then scrap the ship. And that's the life of the ship. So, sad truth.
I think the question may be aimed at, familiar with the Jones Act?
Yes.
I don't know what that means.
Okay, so the Jones Act states that any ship that's transporting cargo from one U.S. port to another has to be built in the United States, crewed by American citizens, and there's one other part to it, I can't remember. But yeah, the ship that I'm on is not Jones Act compliant. So the cargo that we're bringing over from Europe, we're dropping it off in Norfolk, Charleston, or Houston. We're not going to carry cargo from Norfolk and then take it to Charleston to discharge it. That's not our ship.
But you may have a full load and the stuff on top goes to Norfolk, the next set goes to Charleston, and the last stuff ends up in Houston.
That's right, yep.
You can't pick up everything in the U.S. and that's
We can pick something up in the United States, but then it has to be going to Europe. We can't drop it off somewhere else in the United States. That's got to be on a Jones Act ship. Corey?
I assume there are merchant ships that go around the south tip of South America, where the seas are really rough, or around the Horn of Africa.
Mm-hmm. Batten down the hatches. That's it.
Any other questions?